Hello everyone, this is Professor Robert Solis. Welcome to our video lesson. We're going to be talking about the repetition structure. Specifically, let's create a program that allows the user to enter a number, an odd number specifically, and then we'll display odd numbers 1, 3, 5, 7, all the way up to the user number. So let's go ahead and start a C# program, Windows Forms application. So this is going to be C#. We're specifically talking about the repetition structure. We'll call this 2, and we'll say display odd numbers. Oops. Display odd numbers. A little bit too much in terms of the characters here. How about this? Display odd numbers. Nice. All right. And with the form that's going to appear in just a moment, I'm going to make sure that the toolbox is established. The properties panel is also established. Let me enter a button, a label, and a text box. I want all of those to have the 12-point font size, so I will select font and type in 12 over here for the size of the text box. Same thing for the label. And also same thing for the button. All right, now I'm going to take this label and I'm going to move it to the upper left-hand corner. And I'm going to change the text property to enter an odd number. Let me open up the size of the form slightly. I'll place a text box over here to make sure that the user has a place to enter their number. I'll resize the button. So let me first of all move this up here like this, resize the button. That looks good. We'll just simply say submit. I need to enter a label down here. So I'll just take this label, copy and paste it, which is Control-C, Control-V as in Victor. And I'll go to the auto size property, change that to false, border size, change that to fixed single. And then I'll just align that over here like this, make it a little bit bigger. That looks good. Let me make sure that the text is aligned such that it is middle center, this guy right here. And we're going to get rid of the text, so I'll just simply double click, backspace, get rid of that text. I'll reduce the size of the button. This looks pretty good. Let me get rid of the minimize and the maximize box. We're going to change that to display odd numbers. So the text property for the form, display odd numbers. Okay, now let me give names to the various items. So I will change the name of this text box to txt user num. The button, we'll call that btn submit. This label will be lbl result. I'm done, so I'm going to go ahead and click Save All. I'm done with the graphical user interface, that is. I'll minimize the toolbox and the properties panel, double click on the button so I can go into the code area, and we'll start off with our comments. Declarations, get, user input, calculation, output. What is it that the user is going to give to me? They're going to give to me a number. So we'll say int user num, because they're going to give me a whole number. What am I going to give back to the user? I'm going to give to them an output such as 1 space 3 space 5 space, a listing of all these odd numbers up to and including the user number. So over here, I'll go back to the code. We'll create a string called output, and I'll set it equal to nothing. So I'll assign it, I should say, to nothing. Let's go ahead and get the user input. So that means convert dot to int 32, whatever is inside of that text box. This guy right here, let me hit tab, dot, text, tab, and then semicolon. All right, in terms of the calculation, we are going to have to display 1, then 3, then 5. So I don't want you to think of numbers on a line. I want you to think of numbers on a circle. So 1, 3, 5, 7, 9. Well, if you see this behavior because of a series of numbers, then we're going to have to use a looping structure. And if we're going to use a looping structure, I better go ahead and create a counter. So before we enter the counter, it's kind of like before starting a race, you've got to set the counter to some initial value. Now, should we set the counter to 1? I don't think so. To 0 rather. I think we should set it to 1 because 1 is the first odd number. That's the first number that I want to display. Then I want to display 3 and then 5. So you can hear my reasoning for the strategy of why we want the counter to start off equal to 1. Now we can begin our while statement, which is while the counter is less than or equal to the user num. We're going to keep on doing this loop, which is to display odd numbers. The way that we're going to do that is we'll say update the output string. So this is the new and improved version of output. This is the old version of output. What am I going to do? I'm going to take the old version of output. I'm going to concatenate that with whatever the value of counter is. So I'll just simply say convert dot toString whatever the value is of counter, because counter is a number, so I need to convert that to a string so I can concatenate it to a string. And then I'll just simply put spaces in between the numbers. Now, counter at first is going to be 1. I want it to go to 3, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to say counter plus equals 2. This is basically the same thing as saying counter is going to be assigned counter plus 2. In other words, increment the value of counter by 2. And the reason why is I want the next odd number. If the counter is 1 plus 2, now that's 3. If the counter is 3, now it's 5. If the counter is 5, now 7, so forth and so on. So what this repetition structure does is it keeps on displaying or outputting odd numbers, concatenating odd numbers to this string output. Once we're done, then I can just simply say LBL result is going to be assigned whatever the value of output is. All right, now we're nowhere near done with our program, but let's just see what it looks like at this point. So I start, and we're assuming that the user is going to enter an odd number. So let's go ahead and put the number 7, say for example over here, 1, 3, 5, 7. Good. How about the number 13? Okay, so all odd numbers are inserted. Are displayed. That's great. The problem is that the user could enter an even number like this, and so we don't want that. We don't want the user to be able to enter even numbers, because if I said 16, say for example, okay, it displays all the odd numbers, but we want all odd numbers up to and including the user number right here. So we got to make sure that the user enters an odd number. One of the things that we can do is this. First of all, I'm going to allow the user to enter a number. Whatever's in the text box, we put that into user num. If the user num modulus 2 is 0. Okay, so what this does is it says, find the remainder of this. So what is this divided by 2? What is the remainder? Any even number divided by 2, the remainder is always going to be 0. What is 2 divided by 2? What is the remainder of 2 divided by 2? 0. What is the remainder of 4 divided by 2? 0. Any even number modulus 2. In other words, this means what is the remainder of this number divided by 2? If it's an even number, it's always going to be 0. Well, if it's an even number, that's wrong. I want the user to enter an odd number. Well, since the user entered an even number, let's go ahead and display a message box. .show. And I like the 7th version or flavor of this message box.show, which allows me to enter a message, what the title is or a caption, message box, and then a message icon. So the message that I'll enter is enter an odd number. Close the quote, comma. Now we are in this section, which is the caption, which is the title on the top of our message box. I'll just say invalid input. Close quote, comma. Now I get to enter a button. So just type in MESS. So MES. I don't even have to type anymore. Message box buttons, double tap. Dot, what series of buttons do I want to display? In this case, I just want an OK button to display. Comma. All right, type in ME for the message box icon. So we'll say MESS. Oh, there it is, message box icon. Double click. dot. Let me see, what icon do I want to appear? I want the error icon to appear. So I'll just double tap over here, put a semicolon at the end, and we're done with displaying the message box. The user will then click OK, and we don't want to proceed with the program. We want to jump out of the program. But before I do that, let me go ahead and just clear whatever is in the text box, and I'll do it this way. We just assign quote, quote, not even a quote, space quote, just simply quote, quote next to each other. That's going to blank out the text property for this text box. Same thing for the label. I'll just simply set that to nothing. I want to clear it out. And then finally, the last thing to do is we'll type in return. What return does is it jumps out of this btn submit void function. So it literally goes from here, it jumps out over all this stuff, and then goes over here, I should say right there, and then jumps out of the program. So return, you can think of that as jump out of the program, or jump out of this particular procedure, because we don't want to continue with this. We only continue if the user enters an odd number. So let's see what happens. I'll run the program, I type in 6. Invalid input. Okay, so that's this part right here. That's the title. The message, enter an odd number, that was this part right here. This OK button, that's this part right here. And then this icon, that's this part right here. When I click OK, this should be removed. If there were anything in here, it should be removed. And we should go return, which means jump out, and we go back into this particular procedure here. So let me go back over here. Perfect. Everything is cleared out. Now let me try a valid number, like 15. Perfect. It's going to display 1 through 15. All right, so we took care of the user input in terms of making sure that an odd number is displayed. And then what we'll do is we'll go into this while statement. Notice I have a starting point. You remember why we started off with the number 1. The counter is going to be a display of all these odd numbers. Let me just show you this again. 7. Okay, so notice that counter started off as 1. That's this one right here. We take that counter, we concatenate a space, so that's the space right there. Now 1 plus 2 is going to be what counter is now going to be assigned. So that's going to be 3. And so over here we assign that 3 and a space to the old output. We append it. So the new version of output is going to be 1 space 3 space. And so forth and so forth and so on. So counter is going to go to 5 and then 7. As long as the counter is less than or equal to the user number, which in this case is 7, then we are going to display, or we're going to go through this loop to append the output, and then we just simply send that out to the label. And that is how you use the repetition structure to display odd numbers. So this is Professor Robert Solis. I hope this video lesson was helpful. Have a good day. See you next time.